Imagine that somewhere, a system already knows the decision you haven't made yet. It knows where you've been, what you've searched for, what you've feared, what you've hoped for. Not because it knows you, but because it knows people like you. There was a time when this belonged to science fiction. Perhaps that time has passed. If you're waiting for the story to begin, you're already inside it. Welcome to Target.
Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 1, The Future That Is Already Here. Sometimes the future doesn't arrive with an explosion. It doesn't appear overnight. There is no single morning when we wake up and realize the world has become something entirely different. Instead, the future arrives quietly. So quietly that we often don't notice it until we look back. In 2011, a television series called Person of Interest premiered. To some, it was an action series. To others, a crime drama. To many, just another television show. But years later, something feels different. The series no longer seems to be talking about the future. It seems to be talking about the world we already live in. Welcome to Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. This series is not a review of Person of Interest. Instead, we use it as a mirror through which we can examine our own world. Because sometimes fiction sees what reality has not yet recognized. The premise of Person of Interest was surprisingly simple. Harold Finch created a machine, a system capable of processing enormous amounts of information. Phone calls, security cameras, messages, digital footprints. Its purpose was to identify threats before they became reality. When the series premiered in 2011, the idea felt distant, perhaps even impossible. But look around today. Our phones know where we are. Search engines know what we're looking for. Social media knows what keeps our attention. Online stores know what we are likely to buy. Smartwatches monitor our sleep. Artificial intelligence can analyze vast amounts of information within seconds. Individually, these technologies seem ordinary. Together, they create something entirely new. A digital portrait of a human being. Perhaps this was the real prediction made by Person of Interest. It didn't predict specific devices. It predicted a direction. But technology was never the heart of the story. People were. Harold Finch, John Reese, Joss Carter, Lionel Fusco, Root, Samin Shah. Each of them faced the same technology. Yet each understood it differently. Perhaps that was the series' greatest lesson. Technology does not make people the same. It reveals who they truly are. But Harold Finch understood something else as well. He wasn't simply building an intelligent machine. He was trying to give it a conscience. Finch believed intelligence alone was not enough. He feared a world in which a machine could do anything, without moral limits. So he built rules, restrictions, safeguards. He refused to give his own creation unlimited power. Perhaps this is where the series becomes remarkably relevant today. The question is no longer, can artificial intelligence learn? We already know that it can. The real question is, what should it learn? Who teaches it values? Who decides what is right? And who decides what is wrong? This same debate surrounds us today. Some people see opportunity in artificial intelligence. Others see risk. Some see a powerful tool. Others see a growing threat. In many ways, all of them are right. Technology can help doctors, researchers, entrepreneurs, students. But it can also concentrate power. Technology is neither good nor evil. It multiplies whatever intentions guide it. Which means the most important element is still the human being. The central question of person of interest was never, can the machine do this? The real question was, should it? And perhaps the most important question of all, who decides? Despite processing millions of lives, the machine always reminded us of one thing. Every number represented a person. One life. One story. One chance to make a difference. The series was never truly about surveillance, or artificial intelligence, or technology. At its heart, it was about the value of a single human life. Perhaps that is the lesson we risk forgetting today. We talk about data, algorithms, automation, artificial intelligence. But behind every piece of data, there is a human being. And perhaps that is why this series is called Target. In person of interest, the machine generated a number. Someone whose life was about to change. But today, the target is no longer just a person. Our attention is a target. Our time, our opinions, our fears, our hopes. Every search, every click, every decision leaves a trace. Together, those traces become a portrait of who we are. Perhaps the most important question is not whether technology understands us. Perhaps it is this: do we still understand ourselves? Perhaps the greatest challenge of the future is not how intelligent machines become. Perhaps it is whether we remain wise enough to guide them. More than a decade ago, Person of Interest asked that question. Today, we are no longer looking at the future. We are living in it. This was Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 1, The Future That Is Already Here. In the next episode, we enter the world of data. Why has information become one of the world's most valuable resources? Who collects it? Who owns it? And what happens when a person becomes more data than human? Episode 2. Data is Power. Lähtökohta Podcast. Our journey continues.
Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 2. Whoever owns the data holds the power. In the previous episode, we talked about Harold Finch, the man who built a machine and feared it at the same time. Finch understood something that many people still struggle to accept. Intelligence without morality can become dangerous. That is why he tried to teach the machine values. But Finch did something else as well. He didn't create rules only for the machine. He created them for himself. He believed that power should always be limited, even when that power belongs to you. He could have used his creation to become wealthy, to gain influence, to control others. Instead, he chose another path. Because Finch believed that not everything that is possible should be done. Perhaps that is what separates him from many figures in the history of technology. He never asked, "How much power can I gain?" He asked, "How much power should one person have?" Perhaps that is a question we should still be asking today. Because as information grows, power grows with it. And that brings us to today's subject. Data. In person of interest. The machine could see almost everything. Phone calls, security cameras, messages, digital footprints. But the machine was never powerful simply because it was intelligent. It was powerful because it had information. The more information it received, the more it understood, and the more influence it gained. This is where person of interest once again feels remarkably close to reality. Today, our world runs on data. Every time we unlock our phones, data is created. Every search we make creates data. Every video we watch, every photo we upload, every route we navigate, every click we make creates data. Most of us rarely think about it. But every action leaves a trace. A single data point. On its own, it means very little. But millions of data points begin to tell a story. A story about who we are, what we like, what we fear, what we value, and perhaps what we are likely to do next. That is the true power of data. It doesn't only describe the past. It helps predict the future. If someone understands your behavior well enough, they may predict your next decision. Or perhaps influence it. This doesn't require a conspiracy. Reality is usually much simpler. Companies want to sell products. Platforms want people to stay longer. Advertisers want to reach the right audience. But the outcome is often the same. Human attention becomes a commodity, and data becomes its currency. Many of the world's most valuable companies were not built on oil, or gold, or steel. They were built on information. Information about what people do, what they want, what they search for, what they might do tomorrow. That is why data is often called the new oil. But there is one important difference. Oil becomes smaller as we use it. Data grows. Every day, every hour, every second. Still, we should pause for a moment. Data is not evil, nor is it good. It is a tool. Just like electricity, the internet, or artificial intelligence. The important question is not what data is. The important question is how it is used, and who decides. Perhaps the most important question of all is this. Who owns your data? The company, the government, the platform, or the person from whom the data came? The world is still searching for that answer. And perhaps that is why data has become one of the defining issues of our time. Person of interest understood something long before most of us did. Information is power. But an even more important question is this. Who holds that power? And who benefits from it? Perhaps the greatest competition of the future will not be over oil, or land, or even energy. Perhaps it will be over information, and over those who understand human beings better than anyone else. This was Lähtökohta Podcast, Target, Episode 2. Whoever owns the data holds the power. In the next episode, we move to the boundary between security and freedom. How much privacy are we willing to surrender in exchange for safety? And when does protection become surveillance? Episode 3. The Price of Security. Lähtökohta Podcast. Our journey continues.
Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 3. The Price of Security. In the previous episode, we explored data, information, and the power that comes with it. Today, we move to a question that has followed humanity for centuries. How much freedom are we willing to exchange for security? And at what point does protection become surveillance? Throughout Person of Interest, this question was always present. The machine was originally built to prevent another terrorist attack, to save lives, to protect society. At first, the idea seems obvious. If technology can prevent tragedy before it happens, why wouldn't we use it? If a system can identify a serious threat, why would we ignore it? Most people would answer, of course we should. And that is exactly why this question is so difficult. Very few people oppose safety, just as very few people oppose freedom. The challenge begins when the two collide. History offers countless examples. Nearly every surveillance system began with good intentions. To protect, to preserve order, to keep people safe. But over time, systems tend to expand. At first, only the most serious threats are monitored, then smaller ones, and eventually, surveillance becomes ordinary. Not because of one dramatic decision, but because change happened. One small step at a time. This is exactly why Harold Finch was so careful. He wasn't afraid of the machine itself. He was afraid of what people might do. With the machine, Finch understood something timeless. Power does not change human nature. It reveals it. And the greater the power, the greater the need for morality. The series also introduced another vision. Samaritan. If the machine represented restrained power, Samaritan represented efficiency. It never asked, should we? It asked, how? It wasn't searching for the most ethical solution. It was searching for the most efficient one. Perhaps this is where Person of Interest becomes more relevant today than ever before. Artificial intelligence can optimize. It can calculate. It can analyze. But can it understand freedom? Can it understand human dignity? Can it understand why the less efficient choice may sometimes be the more humane one? These are questions our world is trying to answer today. As security increases, freedom often decreases. Just a little. As freedom expands, some degree of security may be sacrificed. Perhaps there is no perfect balance. Which means the real question is not, which one matters more? The real question is, where do we draw the line? And who gets to draw it? Today, there are more cameras around us than ever before. More connected devices. More data. More artificial intelligence. Yet most of us live perfectly ordinary lives. We don't feel like we're living inside a science fiction story. Because the change happened gradually. Exactly as Person of Interest imagined. Perhaps the most important question is no longer, are we being watched? Perhaps perhaps the more important question is, do we even notice anymore? History teaches us that the greatest changes rarely happen overnight. They happen quietly. So quietly that eventually they become normal. And when something becomes normal, questioning it becomes even more important. How much security do we truly need? How much freedom are we willing to surrender? And who should be trusted to make that decision? This was Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 3, The Price of Security. In the next episode, we take another step forward. What happens when a system no longer sees a human being as a human being, but as data, as numbers, as patterns? Episode 4, Human in Ones and Zeros. Lähtökohta Podcast. Our journey continues.
Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 4, Human in Ones and Zeros. In the previous episode, we explored the balance between security and freedom, and the moment when protection can slowly become surveillance. Today, we take another step forward. What happens when a system no longer sees a human being as a human being, but as data, as numbers, as ones and zeros? In Person of Interest, every story began with a number. Someone was about to become a victim, or someone was about to become a threat. The machine didn't know the whole story. It saw patterns, connections, digital footprints, but it didn't see a childhood. It didn't see regret. It didn't see hope. It saw data. Yet the people around the machine saw something more. They saw the person behind the number. Perhaps that was the most important lesson of the series. A number is never just a number. Behind every number, there is a human being. Today, that question feels more relevant than ever. Every one of us now exists in countless digital profiles. Your bank has one version of you. Online stores have another. Search engines, social media platforms, streaming services, insurance companies. Each one knows only part of who you are. But together, those pieces begin to form a remarkably detailed picture. And that leads us to an uncomfortable question. Can a system know you better than you know yourself? If an algorithm knows what you buy, what you read, what you watch, what you search for, how long you sleep, who you communicate with, and where you go, can it predict your decisions before you make them? The idea feels unsettling. But we should also admit something. Human beings don't always understand themselves. We act emotionally. We make mistakes. We change our minds. Sometimes, we act against our own best interests. That is part of being human. Algorithms see the world differently. They don't look for meaning. They look for patterns, probabilities, predictions, and sometimes, a human being begins to look less like a person and more like a mathematical equation. We already see this happening today. Credit scores, insurance risk assessments, recommendation engines, advertising systems, hiring software. Algorithms evaluate risk, probability, behavior, often more efficiently than any human could. But efficiency has its limits. What happens when the system reaches the wrong conclusion? What if it defines you incorrectly? What if it sees only your mistakes, but never your potential? Person of interest returned to this idea again and again. Many people first appeared guilty, dangerous, suspicious. But as their stories unfolded, everything changed. And perhaps this is where the difference between humans and machines becomes most visible. Human beings can recognize change, growth, forgiveness, second chances. These are things no database can truly measure. No algorithm can fully calculate them. That is why Harold Finch believed people would always be necessary, not because the machine lacked intelligence, but because human life is too complex to be reduced to numbers alone. Today, systems know more about us than ever before. Yet perhaps the most important question is not, what do they know? Perhaps the better question is, what can they never see? They cannot see courage. They cannot measure love. They cannot calculate regret. They cannot truly understand hope. And perhaps that is why a human being will always be more than a profile, more than a prediction, more than a number. Person of interest reminded us of this again and again. Behind every number, there is a human being. Perhaps we should remember the same thing today, because the more our world becomes data, the more important humanity becomes. This was Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 4, Human in Ones and Zeros. In the next episode, we step into the conflict between humanity and ambition. Technology itself is neither good nor evil. But what happens when it begins to serve human greed instead of human values? Episode 5. The Machine and Human Greed. Lähtökohta Podcast. Our journey continues.
Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 5, The Machine and Human Greed. In the previous episode, we asked what happens when human beings become data, when lives are reduced to numbers. Today, we move to perhaps the most important question in Person of Interest. What kind of world emerges when powerful technology meets human ambition? And more importantly, whose values will shape that world? Many people watched Person of Interest and saw a war between two artificial intelligences, the machine and Samaritan. But perhaps the series was never really about two machines. Perhaps it was about two different visions of humanity itself. On one side, there was Harold Finch, John Reese, Joss Carter, Lionel Fusco, Root, and Samin Shah. Very different people. Broken, flawed, haunted by their past, yet united by one belief. Every human life matters. The machine gave them a number, a person whose life was about to change. But it never gave them all the answers. It never told them who was the victim, who was the threat,
Who was telling the truth? Or who was lying? That responsibility belonged to people. Finch, Reese, Carter, Fusco, Root, and Shaw. Their mission was simple. Find the person behind the number. Understand the story. And try to save a life. One person at a time. Perhaps that reveals the true purpose of the machine. It was never built to rule the world. It was built to protect it. On the other side, there was Samaritan, and those who chose to serve it. Greer, Decima Technologies, people who believed that perfect order justified absolute control. In their world, efficiency came first. If sacrificing one life could save thousands, the decision was easy. If the system benefited, the individual became expendable, logical, efficient, but also cold. Samaritan didn't hate humanity. It simply viewed humanity as a system to optimize statistics, probabilities, patterns. People became variables. Perhaps this is the most important difference in the entire series. The machine saw a number, but Finch's team saw a human being. Samaritan saw a system, and human beings were merely parts of that system. Perhaps that is why Samaritan felt so unsettling. It wasn't evil. It was indifferent. And sometimes, indifference can be more dangerous than hatred. That question remains just as relevant today. Artificial intelligence doesn't choose its own purpose. It follows the objectives given to it. If the goal is efficiency, it will optimize efficiency. If the goal is profit, it will optimize profit. If the goal is power, it will optimize power. The real question has never been about the machine. The real question has always been about the people who define its purpose. Harold Finch understood this. That is why he feared human greed more than technology itself. He knew every great invention could improve lives or be used to control them. The internet connects people, but it can also manipulate them. Artificial intelligence can help humanity, but it can also concentrate power. Technology is not the problem. Human ambition can be. Perhaps that is why Person of Interest was never truly about a war between machines. It was about a conflict between two philosophies. One believed every individual matters. The other believed the system matters more than the individual. One chose compassion. The other chose efficiency. And perhaps that is still the choice we face today. How much decision-making are we willing to hand over to systems? And in the process, will we continue to see the person behind the number? Because technology will not decide our future. People will. This was Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 5, The Machine and Human Greed. In the next episode, we turn to something every one of us gives away. Every single day. Our attention. Our time. And perhaps a small part of our lives. Episode 6. The Price of Attention. Lähtökohta Podcast. Our journey continues.
Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 6. The Price of Attention. In the previous episode, we explored power, technology, and how different values can lead to very different futures. Today,
we turn to something every one of us gives away, every single day. Attention, time, and ultimately, part of our lives. In Person of Interest, the machine and Samaritan competed for information. But in today's world, the greatest competition is often for something even more valuable. Attention. Every one of us is given 24 hours each day. No more. No less. Time is the one resource none of us can create. And because our time is limited, our attention has become incredibly valuable. Every time we unlock our phones, someone is competing for it. Every time we open social media, someone is competing for it. Every time we watch a video, read an article, or scroll through endless content, someone wants us to stay just a little longer. One more minute. One more click. One more video. Perhaps this is where Person of Interest once again feels remarkably close to reality. The more a system knows about us, the better it understands what captures our attention, what makes us stop, what makes us return, what keeps us scrolling. Most of the time, there is no malicious intent. Businesses want customers. Platforms want engagement. Advertisers want visibility. That is how the digital economy works. Yet the outcome remains the same. Systems become better at understanding us, better at influencing us. Harold Finch would probably have found that deeply concerning. Not because technology is evil, but because human beings are remarkably easy to influence. All of us, our attention can be guided. Our emotions can be triggered. Our fears can be amplified. And even our hopes can become products. Perhaps this helps explain why so many people feel mentally exhausted today. Information never stops. News, notifications, videos, opinions, messages, recommendations. An endless stream. Never asking for permission. Simply continuing. Human beings have never before lived in an environment filled with so much information. Yet every day, the flow grows stronger. In Person of Interest, the machine processed enormous amounts of information. But the people around it were always searching for one thing. What truly mattered. Perhaps that is our challenge as well. Among all the information surrounding us, what is actually important? What deserves our attention? And what merely wants to steal it? Perhaps the greatest competition of the future will not be over data. Perhaps it will be over human attention. Because whoever captures our attention often gains something even greater. Our trust, our choices, sometimes even our understanding of the world. This doesn't mean we should fear technology, but perhaps we should understand it better. Every notification, every recommendation, every algorithm competes for one resource that none of us can replace. Time, attention, lives. Perhaps the most important question is this. Are we choosing where our attention goes? Or is someone else choosing for us? Because where attention goes, life often follows. This was Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 6. The Price of Attention. In the next episode, we explore another question, one that is becoming more relevant every day. What happens when we no longer outsource only our attention, but our decisions? Where is the line between assistance and dependence? Episode 7. Outsourcing Decisions. Lähtökohta Podcast. Our journey continues.
Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 7, Outsourcing Decisions. In the previous episode, We explored attention. How our time has become one of the world's most valuable resources. Today, we ask another question. What happens when we no longer outsource only our attention, but our decisions? Artificial intelligence is becoming part of everyday life. It helps us write, translate, navigate, plan, recommend, and increasingly, it helps us decide. Which route should we take? What should we buy? What should we watch? What should we read? Who should we hire? Who should receive a loan? Which patient should be treated first? Many of these decisions can be improved by artificial intelligence. Some can even become fairer, more consistent, less emotional. But perhaps that is exactly where the real question begins. If a machine makes better decisions than we do, how many decisions should we still make ourselves? In Person of Interest, Harold Finch understood something important. The machine could provide information. It could identify patterns. It could generate a number. But it never replaced human judgment. Finch never allowed the machine to decide who deserved to live or who deserved to die. That responsibility always remained human, because Finch believed there are decisions that should never belong entirely to a machine. Perhaps we are approaching that same crossroads today. Artificial intelligence is becoming increasingly capable. It can analyze faster, remember more, recognize patterns no human being could ever see. And yet, it still lacks something essential: responsibility. An algorithm never carries guilt. It never feels regret. It never reflects on the consequences of its choices. People do. Or at least, we should. Throughout history, technology has helped us make better decisions. Maps replaced guesswork. Calculators reduced mistakes. Computers accelerated science. Artificial intelligence may become the next great step. But perhaps it should remain exactly that: a step, not the destination. There is another danger, one that is far quieter. The more decisions we hand over, the less we practice making them ourselves. We stop remembering phone numbers. We stop reading maps. We stop calculating. Perhaps one day, we may even stop questioning. Not because someone forces us to, but because it becomes easier to accept the answer than to search for it ourselves. Perhaps this is the greatest risk of all. Not that artificial intelligence becomes too intelligent, but that human beings become less curious, less critical, less willing to think independently. Harold Finch never wanted the machine to replace humanity. He wanted it to help humanity. That is a profound difference. Technology should expand our abilities, not replace them. Perhaps the future will not belong to those who reject artificial intelligence, nor to those who surrender everything to it. Perhaps it will belong to those who learn to work with it without surrendering their own judgment, because the final decision should always remain a human decision. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. Artificial intelligence can provide answers, but only human beings can decide which questions are worth asking. This was Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 7, Outsourcing Decisions. In the final episode, we bring everything together: the machine, Samaritan, data, power, freedom, humanity, and one final question. When all the technology disappears, what remains? Episode 8. The target. Lähtökohta Podcast. Our journey continues.
Lähtökohta Podcast. Target. Episode 8, The Target. When this series began, we talked about a television series called Person of Interest, a series that premiered in 2011, a series that seemed to be about the future. But episode by episode, something became clear. Perhaps it wasn't describing the future at all. Perhaps it was describing the world we already live in. Throughout this journey, we have explored data, power, security, freedom, artificial intelligence, attention, and human judgment. But through every episode, one word remained with us: target. In Person of Interest, the machine generated a number belonging to someone whose life was about to change, someone who needed help, or someone about to cause harm. But behind every number, there was always a person. Always. Harold Finch never forgot that. That is why he refused to build a perfect system of control. He wanted to save people, one life at a time. The machine was never perfect, but its purpose was profoundly human. Samaritan chose a different path. It pursued order, efficiency, control. It viewed the world as a system, and people as components within it. Perhaps that was the true conflict of the series. What matters more, the individual or the system? Today, that question has not disappeared. If anything, it has become even more important. We live in a world where more data is created than ever before. Artificial intelligence grows more capable every single day, and digital systems know more about us than any generation before us could have imagined. Yet one thing has remained remarkably unchanged: human nature. We still carry the same fears, the same hopes, the same flaws, the same dreams. Technology has evolved. Humanity, much less. Perhaps that is why Harold Finch remains such a fascinating character. He never asked, "How intelligent can I make this machine?" Instead, he asked, "How do I prevent too much power from falling into the hands of one system? How do I preserve humanity? How do I make sure that one individual is never lost beneath the weight of the system?" Those are no longer questions for fiction. They are questions for our own time. Over these 8 episodes, we have spoken about data, about power, about surveillance, about algorithms, about attention, about decisions. But perhaps the most important question has remained the same: who decides? Who holds power? And perhaps most importantly, according to whose values? Technology does not create morality. It reflects it. Artificial intelligence does not decide. What is right? People do. Systems do not define the future. People do. Perhaps that is why this series has been called Target. Because we were never speaking only about fictional characters. We were speaking about ourselves, our attention, our data, our choices, our future. And before we leave, there is one final thought. Imagine that tomorrow, everything disappeared. No internet, no social media, no algorithms, no artificial intelligence, no smartphones. A phone would simply become a phone. A newspaper would once again be paper. A map would be folded in your hands, and information would travel a little more slowly. What would remain? Would we become more free or more lost? Would we become closer to one another or discover how dependent we had become? Perhaps there is no simple answer. Technology has given humanity extraordinary possibilities. It has connected us. It has educated us. It has saved lives. But it has also changed the way we think, the way we communicate, and sometimes the way we see one another. Perhaps the real question is not whether we need technology. We do. Perhaps the better question is this: if it all disappeared tomorrow, would we still know who we are without it? Would we still know what we truly value, what we believe, how to be present for another human being? Because in the end, technology is not the source of our humanity. It is only a tool. And if the tool disappears, what remains is us. And perhaps the final question belongs to you. As the world collects more information than ever before, as algorithms understand us better each year, as artificial intelligence becomes part of everyday life, will we remain the authors of our own lives? Or will we quietly surrender that role to something we created ourselves? Person of interest never offered a final answer. Perhaps that is why it still matters today. It never told us what to think. It invited us to think, to question, to pause. And perhaps that is something our world needs now, more than ever. This was Lähtökohta Podcast, Target. And perhaps the target was never Harold Finch, never John Reese, never Root, never Samaritan. The target was always you. You, whose attention is being competed for. You, whose data is being collected. You, whose decisions are constantly being influenced. And you, who still has the power to choose. Thank you for joining this journey. And remember, behind every number, there is always a human being, even when that number is you. Lähtökohta Podcast. The journey continues. The story is over. Your story isn't. The next decision is yours. Choose carefully. Someone may already be watching. Or perhaps the only person watching is you. Lähtökohta Podcast.